CultivatED Marketer, episode 35, Communication Trends and an Unconventional Career with Fred Cook. You're going to want to stay tuned for this episode if you're curious about how one goes from becoming a doorman in New York and a ship hand out at sea, and then ends up becoming the chairman and CEO of one of the largest public relation firms in the world. Hear tips on how one evolves their career and ends up exploring new ways of thinking in our conversation with Fred Cook. So where would one even begin based on our conversation with Fred Cook?
Yeah, boy, that's right, Brent. Talk about somebody who has not followed the traditional path. Can we say that? Fred is just a fascinating guy. So glad we're able to get him on. Maybe just a little bit of background for listeners. I met Fred a couple of years ago because his role now, he's had many former roles, as we'll talk about. His role now is he's the director of something called the Annenberg Center for Public Relations at the University of Southern California, and he's been at USC for a while. And we've worked with him at IABC when I was on the board there because we were doing some cooperative research. Annenberg does a lot of research. In fact, they do an annual report that many of our folks may be familiar with. And we worked on one with them last year that involved kind of hybrid workplaces. And then the most recent one is called Mind the Gap, and really looking at communicators, but looking across generations. That's what's unique about this year's report, and covering a lot of territory, different areas, AI, et cetera, et cetera. So I got to know Fred that way, and really didn't know that much about him until I picked up his book, which I know we definitely should list this in the show notes. It's called Improvise, Unconventional Career Advice from an Unlikely CEO. And when he says unlikely CEO, he's right. He's mainly known in public relations circles. He was the CEO at Golin. So Golin. Many folks probably know Golin. It's a huge global PR firm, offices in like 50 countries around the world. And Fred was their CEO for a number of years. I think he's still CEO emeritus is essentially what they call him, even though he's at USC. But again, his pathway was just something out of I'm not sure what kind of, it'd be hard to write it even as a fiction writer. He didn't even get into like corporate life until I think he was like 36 or 37 years old. He had all these other jobs. He was a doorman at a 4-star hotel. He worked on a ship, like a tanker ship.
Ship hand. Yeah.
He was like a driver for one of these like tipsy taxi services, I think, in New York as well. He was a middle school teacher at an inner city LA school. I mean, you couldn't make it up, but frankly,
Forrest Gump would be the closest approximation I could think of.
You're absolutely right. There's got to be somebody from fiction here. I think you're right. I think it is Forrest Gump, but you know what? He has really done a great job of transferring that into not only his base of knowledge that took him into later on the ranks of CEO at the various highest levels of PR, but also, as you and I learned, he uses that story as he works now with young people, his students and things like that.
Yeah, it was tremendous to hear his life lessons and how he associates some of those life lessons and even the thread he brought to us around in all of those stories he shared in that we want folks to check out the book, but I think if there was one takeaway from the book and one word he used, and I picked up on this, was the notion of perseverance, or he really liked the word grit, right?
Yeah.
So even that story he was telling a little bit about being a ship hand, that didn't happen on the first ask, right? Yeah. And what I loved about it was the bridge it brought to the stories of how he relates to students today and the asks he makes of students today to share some of those life lessons and put them in as close approximation as he can of in his shoes to make those asks. I thought that was a great lesson that people will hear in the conversation with him about what he has his students do and how that kind of changes their lives. And then two, also as it relates to the study itself, as you're trying to look into the future itself, that bridge of his life experience and thinking about, talk about somebody that's been so adaptable to change, for him to pick up and say, you know what, I'm going to explore and focus on how the world's going to change.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's an amazing bridge from past to current for him. And it was so amazing to have that conversation with him.
Yeah, well, definitely his advice to young people. You're right, of course, and I work a lot now, obviously, with young people. That's my day job, and I teach at the college level, as does he. But I'm definitely going to shamelessly steal a couple of his assignments for students, because you're right, he's really big on, and I think this is so true. And you and I have talked about this with young pros, is getting out of your comfort zone. You said perseverance, absolutely, but even further to that, stepping away from what would be the norm and just making that extra ask, right? Taking that extra step. Maybe following that path that's maybe not as well trod, and I just, again, we see this with young people. They're reticent to do that, and so he's big on getting out of your comfort zone, which frankly is good advice for all of us.
Yeah,
but you need to learn it early, I think, is Fred's point.
Yeah, I went immediately from getting outside of my comfort zone to failure, because I'm so good at it that I went immediately to the failure and perseverance part of that conversation. I'm pretty good about just throwing myself out there. Yeah.
But don't you agree? I mean, you and I both know very successful people, right? And a lot of, you can definitely point back to points in their career where they sort of asked, I'll give a little preview, where they asked the captain, right? Which is, and Fred will talk about the meaning of that in the chapter in his book, but we see that all the time. And again, these sort of uber successful folks, they it's not like they plateaued or they sort of took the road more traveled. There were distinctive points in their life where they said, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to make that, unconventional ask. Gosh, I can think 4 or 5 faces are popping in my head. People like that all the time.
I think you hear those stories all the time, whether it's a story of personal perseverance or business perseverance. It's making that ask. And on occasion, so much of life is about timing, as he shared, which was emblematic of that story, Ask the Captain. It's so much about timing that you have to make that ask multiple times, which reminds me, I have an ask to make of a prospect that I've asked a couple different times. I'm like, are we doing this or not? So,
I think, hey, if the conversation for Fred can get people to get off the stoop and actually get rolling on something, that's great. But no, it was a great conversation. And the other thing too about, and we covered this a little bit, is Fred's worked with some very powerfa people, right? I mean, Golin had clients like Apple, Disney. He's worked with Steve Jobs, Michael Eisner, Bezos, Amazon was a client of Golin's as well. So did some work, I know, in the gaming industry. It talked a little bit, or in the, I guess.
Yeah, it was gaming. It was Nintendo.
Gaming. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it was. And I was particularly fascinated with some of the discussion we had around Nintendo. And part of that was selfish. So my younger spawn loves some gaming. So I may have asked a follow-up question or two. So my son might actually listen to the show, knowing he might be engaged in the Nintendo conversation. That's how this thing works, right?
Definitely.
So, yeah, just to hear about those experiences, about what is it like to work with some of the biggest names, some of the greatest leaders, and then to hear him, because he had no compunction about offering up. He's at a stage in his life where he's like, here's the real scoop on some of this leadership. Right. Obviously all brilliant, but a bit about style. It was an interesting discussion around leadership style that we had.
Yeah, fascinating. It really was.
Yeah. Anything else you can think of, or should we just let people kind of get into this? Fred's really the show.
This is a must listen. Let's get to it.
All right. Well, everybody have a great time and enjoy the conversation with Fred Cook as much as Matt and I did. Welcome to CultivatED Marketer, where we talk marketing professional development so your garden of opportunity grows. This is Brent Bowen, and my partner in communication, Matt Tidwell, isn't with me for this initial read, but he is with me for this interview. We were so excited and wanted to make sure that we got all the conversation in with our guest that we jumped right into it. And speaking of our guest is the director of the USC Annenberg Center for Public Relations and chairman emeritus of Golin, formerly known as Golin Harris, one of the world's largest public relations firms. He worked with clients like Nintendo, McDonald's, Toyota, just to name a few. And in 2014, he authored a book titled Improvise, Unconventional Career Advice from an Unlikely CEO. Under his leadership, Golin was voted Agency of the Year more than a dozen times. And it's with that we welcome Fred Cook to the show. We hope you enjoy hearing from him and his stories as much as we did.
Okay, thanks very much. And Fred, first of all, I know your time is valuable, so we really, really appreciate your being with us today on the podcast. So excited to have you on. And I know we want to cover a lot of territory. We've got some time, which is great. And particularly, I want to spend a lot of time with you on your specific thoughts regarding today's young students and professionals, because I know that, like a lot of us, you've made that a big part of your latter career, and certainly we'll come back to that. But let's start here. A few years ago, you wrote a terrific book called Improvise, Unconventional Career Advice from an Unlikely CEO. And in it, you talk about your very non-traditional career journey. And why is it, do you think, that some of your unique first life experiences, and there were a bunch of them, right? Hotel doorman, working on a cargo ship, teaching junior high school, I think even starting a ride service for late night drunks. So I would love to hear more about that. But anyway, of all those experiences, why were those integral to your later success and ultimately to your becoming a CEO?
Well, that's a good question. And the book sort of explains it. And that's the textbook I use for the class that I teach at USC. We talk about being a leader through experience. And I think you can learn a lot from books in school and movies and magazines, but nothing replaces real life experience. And I believe that doing different things every day or every week or every month expands you outside of your comfort zone. And you learn new things from that. And it makes you more creative, because you have lots more ideas. It makes you more courageous because you get over little fears that you have. It makes you more confident because you've done things that you've never done before. And I think those are the components of being a leader. And I try to teach that theory to my students in my class.
Yeah, great.
As part of that journey, so you had all this diverse experience that led up to your time when you ended up coming into communications. We'd love to ask you a little bit about that time in communications and particularly leading Golin, which is one of the most acclaimed names in the PR industry. And you guys worked on so many iconic campaigns and projects. You had the opportunity, you mentioned kind of diverse experience and getting out in the world. You've had the opportunity to work with some of the most famous CEOs, Steve Jobs, a Herb Keller, Jeff Bezos, a Michael Eisner. Particularly sweet name for me, as I'm kind of a Disney guy, so the Michael Eisner thing's great. But each of them had their own style. Just reading that list, you can tell immediately each of them had their own style. What timeless lessons stuck with you from each of them?
Well, we talk about this in my class, that you don't have one style, there's not just one style of leader. They're all different kinds of styles, but there are things in common that they all have in common. And determination, so this relentlessness, risk-taking, there are things that each one of them have that they, despite failures, they keep on going and they keep coming back, and they're just dedicated to what their vision of what a company could be or what they need to do. So I think there's a common thread there, but their personalities are all different. Steve Jobs was very difficult to work with, really challenging guy. And I watched him demean people in meetings that, to the point that I couldn't understand why they would work there. But he was a genius as far as his products, marketing products was concerned. Herb Keller, that ran Southwest, we worked for him for many years, and he was the only guy that I ever seen give a speech with a cigarette in his mouth and a glass of wild turkey on the podium. But he was funny, and he kissed everybody, and he was just a good old boy, but smart as a whip. And he built Southwest into a huge airline based on a little design he made in a bar. I worked with Sheldon Adelson, who was a big Trump supporter, and he opened the Venetian Hotel in Las Vegas. And not a lot of people like Sheldon, but he's a billionaire. He's one of the richest people in the world. But, there was a part of him, there was this soft, grandfatherly guy, and he was very generous with people. But if you crossed him, he'd sue you upside down, one side, the other. So there's no formula for success. And I think that's what I try to teach my students, that anybody can be successful if you have some of these traits that these leaders have, but you don't have to share their personalities.
Those traits being that determination and that doggedness to to just see success is what I heard out of that.
Yeah. There's one video, my students bring in gurus, TED Talks, people talk about different attributes of leadership. And one of the ones is about grit. And I think grit is a nice word to describe what most of these people have.
Yeah, for sure. Fred, maybe just, again, it's kind of staying in that time frame. We'll get to your more recent engagements here in a while, but I know you were at Golin for a long time, terrific agency, as Brent said, and got a flavor for that just in looking back through some of not only your book, but also social media posts, things like that you've done. But what were a couple of the most impactful and memorable client engagements? I know there were several you had, but that you really look back favorably on with particular pride, just as you look back at your career there?
Well, the one thing at Golin that we focused on was we didn't care how many clients we had, but we liked to work for them for a long time. And we've worked for McDonald's for more than 60 years. And we've worked for Nintendo for more than 30 years. And I was the person that led the pitch to win Nintendo way back then. And we were a small agency in Los Angeles. We were a boutique agency called Berkmer & Klein that was bought by Golin. And we were up against Hill & Knowlton and Burson Marsteller, these two huge companies. And we were much smaller. And we won that account. And it was, I think, due to just persistence and grit. And we were so excited to beat these two huge agencies. And then we've worked with them for 30 years. And we introduced all their products. And they're continue to be wildly successful. And so I think that longevity, to be with a client for that long is what was so rewarding. And, you have ups and downs along the way, but the length of time you spend with somebody like that is unusual. And it's highly motivating for me.
What would you say Nintendo in particular is intriguing to me, and folks that are listening to this are not going to have the benefit of our pre-conversation because international, whether it be travel or life experience, we all were relaying how we've been on different trips. And then we were talking about the enrollment of international students. With Nintendo being an international company, what would you say factored into maybe some of the decision-making with Nintendo as an international company and how they may have come to that decision to work with you all too?
Well, I can tell you one story that sort of answers that question. Once we won the account, before they gave us the assignment, told us we won, they wanted us to pitch to their president, who was Japanese. He was in America, but he was Japanese. And they said, if he won't say anything during the whole presentation, and so don't ask him any questions. And if he says something, just say yes and then leave. And we presented all these ideas. And one of the ideas was a van tour where we equipped a van with all the Nintendo equipment, took it all around the country to radio stations and TV stations. And nobody had ever done that before. And he said at the end of the presentation, he said, I like everything but the van tour. And everybody started to get up and leave. And I thought, oh, this isn't good. That's the best program we've got. And so I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Arakawa. If there's only one program you do with us, it should be that. And he looked at me, and everybody else was like in jaw drop when I did that. I had never met him before. And he looked at me and said, okay. And he left the room. So it was working with people from other countries, especially Japan, it's really interesting. They're hard to read, and you expect one thing, and sometimes you get something totally different. But that was a real moment for me.
Were you ever able to maybe unpack the thought process or decision making that led to one word of response and then to the okay? Like it was, I could read into that and go, it was your conviction. It was like the lesson. Were you able to unpack that with him at any point?
Well, I didn't ever ask him about it again, but I didn't think that was appropriate. But
yeah,
they treated him with such respect and awe. I think that the key thing in that relationship and any relationship is trust. And I had never met him before. That was the first time I'd met him. But I think you just have a feeling when you're with people in a relationship, business or otherwise, you know if there's somebody you can trust. And I think he just trusted us.
Excellent.
And yet we did that program for 25 years, and it was successful every year.
That's an awesome story, and I appreciate you trusting us with it. That's very cool.
Definitely. Fred, question for you, because you were a CEO on your own, and I know that, lots of employees, global agency, you were really committed, I know just from talking to you in the past, to building a great culture at Golin. And we could probably do an entire story on that alone, right? How to build culture within large organizations. But I did hear you, I think at a conference, might have been the IBC conference a couple of years ago, talk about what you call the tattoo story. Can I get you to talk just a little bit about that and fill in the blanks there for listeners?
Well, it's a long story, but I'll make it short. When the whole world went digital, all the agencies kept the same structure they'd always had, all the PR firms. Nobody was changing, and the whole world was changing. Nobody was changing. I thought, this isn't going to work. This model we have, this hierarchical model where everybody knows the same things, and they're just older than the people below them. It's like the army. So we blew that up, and we created what we called G4, which was 4 communities of specialists in strategy, specialists in media, specialists in account management, specialists in research. And we organized our whole company around G4 and every office and every account so that we had people doing things they were good at and not spread across a million things that they weren't good at. And when we did that, we renamed everybody catalysts and strategists and connectors. And people made fun of us. And there's a story in the New York Times about us, and everybody made fun of us, all the other agencies. Somebody wrote a story. They were going to start an agency called Oranges, Tangerines, Apples, and Pears. and we sent them a basket of fruit. Easy response. But we did this. It was really exciting. Nobody had ever done this before. And we got thousands of articles written about us. And we were a couple of years into it, and I felt like we were losing momentum. Everybody thought, well, this is just a fad. We're going to go back to doing things the way we used to do. And they started compromising the structure that we had. And I thought, what can I do to convince them that this isn't going away, that this is the way we're going to be forever? And so I got my first tattoo, and I made a video of it. My son made a video of it with me in Hollywood. I got a tattoo of the G4 logo on my shoulder. And I made a video and sent it out to the whole company just to prove that this was something that was going to be permanent. And it worked. People realized if he's tattooing it on his body, then he must be serious about it. And I said, anybody else can have a tattoo of it also, and we'll pay for it. And guess how many people did?
How many?
None. I was the only one. But the agency still uses this model. It's still the way we operate. And I think it's been a huge success for us.
I asked that question because, Brent, we talk with so many guests about walking the walk. Mm-hmm. There's walking the walk, and then there's getting a tattoo on your body. Can we agree? Yeah.
The funny thing was, a year later, every other agency was copying us.
Was that exactly right? Oh, in that configuration.
That's that model. Yeah, and that model. Well, something that wasn't permanent was your life in agency. And honestly, I'm contemplating kicking Matt off the interview at this point because with this next question, I may be coming for his job. Oh. So you ended up switching careers later in life from working agency and moving into academia.
Yeah.
And are now, advancing the knowledge of younger generations, or those who, as Matt and I've had students that decide to come back and sharpen the saw as well. They may not always be younger generations. What led you to make that switch?
Oh, a couple of things. One is I'd been CEO for a long time, and I was getting a little bored with it. And there were some other people at our company that wanted a shot at that, and I realized that. And Willow Bay called me from USC and said, would I be interested in this job? And I said, yeah, I would be, because I would love to see if what I wrote in this book is teachable. Mm. And I said, but I can't quit. I'm the CEO. And she said, well, that's okay. You can do both jobs. So I went to Interpublic and told them what I wanted to do, and they agreed to it. So for the first 5 years here, I flew from Chicago to LA every week to teach my class and then go back and work at Golin. And I did that for 5 years. And then finally I was made chairman, and I moved out to LA permanently. And the reason for doing it was, number one, I wanted to exercise a different part of my brain. I had run an agency for a long time. I knew that I could do that in my sleep. And at USC, it's a whole different, I think much more broadly about our business, and interacting with the students is really fun. And Willow is a wonderful boss. So it's been ideal for me. And I think that on the mission side of it is, I think that PR needs more bold thinkers than we have. I think I love public relations, and I think it's a very dynamic field, but we need stronger, more courageous people in it. And that's what I try to do. I try to embolden our students and get them excited about being leaders of the future of this industry, because I love it.
Yeah, that really comes through. In your book, Fred, you encourage people, and I'm sure you do this now with your students as well, and you talked about it just briefly at the beginning, but you encourage people to take specific steps to broaden their perspective, gain inspiration. Yeah. Why is that so important, particularly, certainly in our field? And would you say it's even more important for people like our listeners who are young communicators, young storytellers, things like that?
Well, I find that younger people in particular are afraid of a lot of things these days. And they spend a lot of time with their own cohort, their own friends, and they do things in groups. And they're very afraid. I think social media has something to do with it, of being different, trying something different. And I think that stifles their careers. It stifles their creativity. Because if you do the same thing over and over and over, you're just sort of, and the same thing everybody else does, you're never going to have an original idea. And the world is changing so fast with AI and hybrid and polarization and all the things that are happening. And our industry is changing. And if you're not flexible, if you can't improvise, if you can't think out of the box, you're going to have a hard time surviving in that. And so I think that young people today need to step outside their comfort zone and experience new things so they'll have more ideas in their head to work with, and they'll have more confidence about doing things. Because if you're just doing the same thing over and over, it can be very comforting. It's very snug and warm inside of your comfort zone, but you don't learn anything new. And as you get older, it gets harder and harder. You go to the same restaurant, you order the same thing, it's in the same booth, and that's so comfortable because you don't take any risks. There's no gamble. There's nothing. You know exactly what you're going to get, but it stifles your creativity. We used to go to Hawaii and we'd stay in the same hotel, the same room, same time every year. I didn't even take my camera after a while because all the pictures looked the same. It was fun, but I didn't. You have to do things a little different. So I forced my students to do something different every single week, and they do some wild things.
Yeah, that's a great part of your book. Hey, as a follow-up, and you do, that really comes through in the book. You've got to widen your perspective. But there is one spot I noticed in there where you talk about conformity is important. I love your advice to job seekers. You might have to conform and kind of play the part a little bit to get the job, but, quote, once you're established, you can reveal your inner weirdness. Yeah. So there's a place for conformity, I guess, right, in certain situations.
Well, I think hiring today is, and has been for a long time, is a lot like dating. People tend to hire people that they like and are like them and like the same things they do, which creates a sort of conformity inside an organization. So if you come in and you act, you're a little offbeat, I think that's fine. If you're way off, way different than the culture of that company, they're not likely to take a chance on you. So it's just a matter of how you approach it in the beginning. Like I used to wear wooden clogs all the time. But I didn't ever wear them to work in the beginning. I was always dressed in a coat and tie and all that. But, once I became the general manager of the office, then I would do that. I would show my real self. But people say, bring your real self to the office. It's not always true in the beginning. I think sometimes you have to compromise and to fit into the culture. And once they know you and they appreciate you, then you can be your real self. But I think depending on where you're going to work, sometimes you have to cover up your tattoos or wear different shoes or cut your hair a little differently. Just so people think that you can be part of that company.
Yeah, I love some of the juxtaposition of both of these last points around getting out of your comfort zone, but at the same point, that inner weirdness is bringing you a couple of the things that you're really comfortable with and sharing them out. So, bringing both of those facets of it as maybe advice or tips for job seekers or for those in their career. And that's what this show's really about, is professional development, for anybody in their journey. And that's what I loved about the study too, is, you hit the 4 generations. Yep. And actually, we've got a 5th generation that's going to be coming into the workforce soon, is a lot from and everybody learns a little bit differently. They engage a little bit differently. A lot of people, go ahead, Fred.
I was just going to say, our surveys showed, we asked which generation was the most well-informed, and every generation said that they were.
Yeah. Each generation was, voted themselves number one.
They voted themselves number one, and it just depended where they were getting their information, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of where people could get some good information around professional development, in your book, regardless of generation, is in your book, from your younger days, you have a story called Ask the Captain. How would you explain that to folks on the show here about the genesis of Ask the Captain?
Well, I create a lesson on every chapter for students. And so the lesson in Ask the Captain is based on a story that happened to me. When I was in Hawaii, I found a Norwegian ship was in port being repaired. And I always wanted to work on a ship. And so the guy I was with, we were camping around the islands, and we went to the ship, and they said, there was a guy standing there on the dock. And I said, is it possible to work for your passage? Meaning you don't get paid, but you work and you get off wherever you want to. And he goes, well, sometimes they can do that, but the only person that can give you permission is the captain. You have to ask him. So my friend and I went up on the ship, found the captain, knocked on his door, and we made that request. And we were kind of looked like hippies. And he said, no. He was a Norwegian guy. And he said, no. He was leaving the ship in a few weeks, and he didn't want to leave a couple of American kids I was 21 at the time, on board. So we left, and we were eating a pineapple in Hawaii, which is what they have for lunch there. And I said to my friend, do you mind if I go back by myself and ask again? Maybe if it's just one of us, he'll change his mind. So I went back, I got on the ship, walked up to the captain's cabin, knocked on the door. And I said, look, if it's just me, would you reconsider? And he goes, actually, in the few hours since you've been here, our mess man is sick and he's flying back to Norway. So not only will I take you, I will pay you his salary. And from there, I went to Japan and China and Hong Kong and Singapore. And I finally got off the boat in Singapore, and I traveled all over Asia for a year. And the only reason I was able to do that, it was the greatest adventure. When everybody else was doing internships and going to school, I had dropped out of college and traveled to all these amazing places, Iraq and Afghanistan and Iran and places you can't even go today. It was because I asked this captain twice. And people, when they're looking for jobs, they don't think that they can be that persistent. They're reluctant to ask people more than once for something. So the assignment for them is at the beginning of the semester, they choose somebody they want to meet with at a company, and they have to figure out how to get a meeting with them throughout the semester. We write cold emails, we post on LinkedIn, and we go to see them speak. We stalk them until they get a meeting, and about half of them do. And so that's what has to happen. It's hard. It's hard for them because they don't know that you can send an email to somebody you don't know. They don't know that you can call somebody's office, that your phone actually calls people besides texting them. So it's a great lesson, but they don't like it very much. But yeah. I make them do it.
Well, in your story too, the part I can appreciate is how quickly circumstances can change. A lot of a response given was circumstantial. The first response that you received was, I don't want to leave the two of you as a mess as part of a succession plan for the next captain. Right. And circumstances quickly changed in the hours that you were there. I'm more curious though, really about how your buddy felt about the whole thing after you left him behind.
He came down to the dock with me. He was sitting there on the dock, and he got smaller and smaller as we went out to sea. He became a marijuana grower on Maui and grew marijuana for the rest of his life.
Oh, on Maui.
On Maui.
Wow. So he
did all right.
So he had his own path there.
To your point, timing is everything. You've got to be in the right place at the right time. You can't send in a resume or call somebody and think they're going to remember that a month later. So the idea that you have to follow up is critically important. We went to some agencies in Chicago with students last year, and one of the agencies is a Wasserman. It was a music agency, and he said, bands call me all the time for me to sign them up. But he said, I don't even look. And he said, unless they send 3 emails, I only look at the third. I ignore the first 2. If they don't have enough determination to send me the third email, I don't even want to talk to them. So he's ignoring them on purpose. And people don't realize that. They think, oh, I left a message, but they didn't call back, and they just forget about it. Most people are too busy.
Yeah. And, we've talked on the show a little bit about that, there are ways to kind of ask for that meeting without, I'm thinking of things like, for instance, informational interviews. Right? I always tell students, make it a point to do some informational interviews. The organization, the company may not have a job opening at the time, but you're going to learn more about the organization. You're going to learn more about the position. And people often are willing in some pretty high executive levels to do informational interviews. So you make a great point, Fred.
So all fabulous points for any sort of relationship development. I even would think in the agency world, too, that would be appropriate around outreach to prospects and clients. It's when I worked on the client side at T-Mobile, I had the music industry, this music agency was 3 touches before they would respond to a band. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cause when I worked at T-Mobile, I had a 2-touch rule that if an agency or a potential partner would reach out a second time, I wasn't just on a call sheet. They were really paying attention to what we were doing and wanted to truly engage. Three's fascinating.
Were you there when John Laguerre was there?
Predated that. Yeah.
Predated.
Yeah.
We pitched T-Mobile. Golin pitched T-Mobile, and I was part of that pitch, and it was just great. And they didn't hire us, and I'm still pissed off about it.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to create PTSD during our chat.
If you're long enough in your career, you have a lot of PTSD.
Yeah, that's probably true. Matt, to you for questions. I think I've insulted our guest.
No, this has been such a great conversation, Fred, and thank you so much for your time. As we move toward an ending, though, a couple of questions about your role as the director for the Annenberg Center for Public Relations at USC, because before I knew you, I was absolutely aware of the Global Report. It's a yearly report. It's must reading, frankly, for me, for my students. It's it's the Edelman Trust Barometer. Those are kind of the 2 biggies that I look at every single year. But I was going back through some of them, and it seems like to me that you all have been a bit ahead of your time with the contents of that report many times over. As for instance, you talked about the broad acceptance of activism a few years ago, and then in the Edelman Trust survey just this past year, sure enough, they noticed an increasing comfort with, quote, overt activism. You talked a few years ago about polarization as a huge issue on the horizon, and now that's come to pass as well. What allows you guys to have such a sharp future vision? What is it about the DNA of your organization that allows you to be that prescient?
Well, our organization at the Center for PR is me and one other person.
Oh, okay.
It's not a big group. But the nice thing is that the school gives us free total autonomy. So we can look at any topic we wanted. And the Trust Barometer is become a standard, but they do the same thing every year, pretty much. And we try to be more ahead of the times. We try to do things that we think are happening next. We just did a survey with the PR firm formerly Wagner Edstrom, about AI branding, how companies are being branded by AI these days, and how you can affect and monitor that and change it to improve your branding on AI. And it's called GEO. It's just like SEO for search engines. But we were trying to find out who's doing it and what they're doing. And so we're always looking at something on the cutting edge of the future to give people some idea of where our industry is headed. And this is a fascinating survey. A lot of people are excited about AI, but very few are doing anything to manage their brand on it so far. And we'll be releasing that in a couple of weeks. And then we're working on a study now about polarization again, because what has happened in this last year is every communications at every company related to issues, the environment, ESG, DE&I is shut down. And it's basically because of the political polarization in our country. And we're going to try to find out what that means for our PR industry if at corporate levels we're not communicating very much anymore, and how long that's going to last, and is that going to change the way we work forever? I don't know. So we're trying to find out. So we just do things that we think are cool. And a lot of people copy us.
Personally, the GEO, so that's the space a lot of my particular agency is in content marketing and then SEO. And actually, we've been consulting clients a lot on AI integration. So I'll be interested. When will the study be made available freely? Because I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And then I'll probably look at the data as part of some of the training that we're doing for clients, because I was as Matt mentioned, I was in Minneapolis 3 weeks ago, and anybody that was doing a session, I was speaking on AI as it relates to audio and video production, but a lot of the sessions were around AI and search and visibility for brands, and it was standing room only in every one of the sessions. If you didn't arrive 15 minutes before the session, you were going to have to sit in somebody's lap in order to find a place. So really, really intriguing stuff. I'll be fascinated. The study will be free to access.
The survey is completed. We're writing an executive summary now, and we will work with to distribute the information more broadly. So I imagine it will be available before the end of the year.
Before the end of the year?
In a month, probably.
About a month. Oh, well, we'll make sure we'll do an update to the show notes for folks, even if the show comes out beforehand, and share. But this is what Matt's talking about, is some of this is just in time, but you all seem to be ahead of your time. What's the next big thing aside from maybe the GEO stuff? Is there anything that Communicators, you guys are tracking or thinking, you're even thinking about personally, that's kind of next on the horizon?
Well, I'm always optimistic about public relations. I think it's a great field. I am a little nervous about what's happening now with I would have told you 2 years ago that purpose was going to be the trajectory for our industry, that we were going to talk about what companies are doing to improve society for a long time. And that just fell off a cliff. And so I think that's what the future that I'm thinking about now is, what does that mean for our profession if we're paralyzed and not communicating the good things that we're doing or the good things that companies are doing? I'm not sure what that looks like in the future. I've seen a couple of entities, corporate entities, reshuffle their communications departments and get rid of the CCO and push all the PR down into the brands. And I think that's a very interesting trend. I don't know if that's going to be happening more and more, but I think it's, with all the different changes, it's probably time for us to reinvent a little bit what PR is all about, because AI is going to do a lot of the things we do much faster and cheaper than an agency can do, or a PR person. So between AI and this political situation we're in and everything else, and the media continuing to go more digital to influencers instead of journalists, it's time to rethink, I think, what we're all about. And that's why we try to do things that make people think about the future.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. As I remember looking at the Mind the Gap study, it looked like purchasing decisions were still aligned, particularly for Gen Z and millennials, aligned to purpose-driven brands. But I think what you're not hearing about, because I was actually working on one of these for a client 6-8 years ago, was a lot of emphasis on B Corp. You're not seeing a lot of that emphasis on B Corps as much anymore, or a lot of the discussion or talk about that anymore. So that it sounds like that's what's top of mind for you.
Well, it is. And I'm not saying it's good or bad. Yeah. I have my own personal feelings about it, but I think it's important to know what's happening. And with AI, with social media, the young students, college students everybody's hiring young people because they understood social media. They're very conversant with it. So they brought them in to do digital and social, and Facebook, Instagram, and all that, and TikTok. AI is different. There is no advantage to being a college student in AI. Everybody's sort of drowning in it at the same time. And so I think it's really important for young people to be conversant with AI, because if they're not, they're going to have a hard time getting a job. I had one student this semester who was specialized in AI, did his thesis on AI, knew everything about AI. He's creating all these new services, and he had 5 or 6 job offers when he graduated. I think that's going to be the thing for younger people, is understanding that all the aspects of that, because that's going to be huge.
Yeah,
change the game.
Yeah, and what we're seeing is not just one-off being able to. Although it's interesting, I was working on a project last year with McKinsey, where even within McKinsey, a consulting firm as renowned and the intelligence level, I think folks would admit, is at McKinsey, 50% of the company, they said, was still struggling with prompt engineering. But I think the folks that are even doing it well are thinking about complex workflows and how to bring together complex workflows using AI, to bring full solutions using AI, not just one-off prompts.
And I did a podcast with Frank Shaw, the head of PR at Microsoft, and I asked him about the training aspect of it. I said, who should be training people on AI? And he goes, they have to train themselves. He said, you individually, you have to go out there and you have to be curious, and you have to look for things and educate yourself and try new things, which is exactly what we're talking about with my book, is on your own, because it's happening so fast that nobody can teach it to you. Mm-hmm. So if you're not curious and enough to go out and find out what's happening in this world, you're likely going to be left behind. And that's interesting coming from Microsoft, because they could obviously are huge in AI and they could train everybody, but it's an individual sort of thing.
Yeah, it gets to that interpersonal grit you were talking about earlier in our conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
This has been a fabulous conversation, Fred. Is there anything else you'd like to mention that Matt and I, knowing that we have gaps in our own knowledge and ability to conduct a great interview, is there anything else that you'd like to mention that we may have missed?
Well, it was funny coincidence. I mentioned this in Mind the Gap. One of my students in our class, they have to create a business. And she created a PR firm, all AI. And she said she was going to operate it. She was going to bill their clients $15.99 a month. And in the class, when she presented it, I questioned the pricing. I said, how can you do, most people bill $400 an hour or $500 an hour. How are you going to do it for $15? And she's all with AI. And I said, okay, fine. And I thought that was a little silly. But then a month ago, a guy came to me and he has created an AI platform for small business to do PR, and it's $49 a month.
Well, okay. So she wasn't that far off.
Wasn't that far off. And you can plug and play all AI, and it does everything that a PR agency would do for a small business. And it's $49 a month.
$49 a month.
So it's a little scary to think that that's possible. Maybe it isn't possible, but that's how much change is taking place right now.
Yeah, it's really been at light speed. Fred, gosh, thank you so much for sharing your time, your compelling stories with us. We absolutely cannot recommend your book highly enough to listeners, to others. I know, again, it just refreshed my memory going through it. I'm now going to be using it in my classes. And if it's okay with you, I'd love to steal your assignment there on go ask somebody who you don't think will give you an audience to do so. I just think that's a great way to get folks out of their comfort zone and just love what you're doing at this point in your career. And your students are obviously extremely lucky. And it's been a pleasure. I know you and I have worked together in a couple projects. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, and just again, keep doing what you're doing, and we'll be following from afar.
I will keep trying. Thank you guys both. I appreciate it. And I'll talk to you soon.
You bet. Thanks, Fred.
Thanks, Fred.
Bye-bye.
If you found value in today's episode, check us out on our website, CultivatedMarketer.com. You'll also be able to subscribe to us, rate us, and leave us a comment on your favorite podcast platform, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Remember, a garden of opportunity grows with Cultivated Marketer.